Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today. This past Thursday was Veterans Day, but it's not always been Veterans Day. If you were in England, it might be Remembrance Day. If you were in France, it would be Armistice Day, which is how the day initially began. On the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour, the end of World War I came into being. And so what was initially Armistice Day celebrated the end of violence. But of course, in the ways that holidays evolve and we draw our attentions to different things in different ways for different reasons, France, the UK, and the United States have named that holiday, based on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, differently. So what I've been musing about is what we hold on to in our values by remembering Veterans Day specifically, and what have we lost by thinking about it as a day that isn't Remembrance Day or Armistice Day. I'll also add that it's important that whenever we celebrate communion, Jesus tells us to remember. One of the most important things about our communion service is that we remember that first night that Jesus gathered around his disciples for that first last communion. How we tell that story and why it's important to us is just as important as how we tell the story and how we think about this day on November 11th. That's what I've been musing about, and there's a lot more to say. Is it the people who serve and have served, the people that we celebrate? Is it remembering the event or the atrocities of World War I that we are called to remember if it's Remembrance Day? Or is it armistice, the general idea that there is a time to put down our arms and to stop violence that we should draw our attention to? Three options, each important in its own way. If you'd like to think more about those, then I encourage you to stick around. I have just a little bit more to say. World War I was called the Great War, the war to end all wars. But from 1918 to 1939, we know that that wasn't the case. The Second World War came to be, and other wars have happened since. The idea that we would celebrate a time when the lion or the wolf lies down with the lamb, that the sword is turned into plowshares, the things of destruction are used for things that are creative, that day has never fully come into being. And so here in the United States we have 2 days. Memorial Day, where we remember our dead nationally. All Saints Day, which we recently celebrated to remember all the saints, some of whom are living. There's a lot of focus on those who have gone before us. And we have Armistice Day or Veterans Day, when we remember those who have served in the past or who are serving currently. Remember the troops, support the troops. This is a line that almost everyone generally agrees with. Of course, we support the troops even in times when the wars are questionable or we have our feelings or differences about opinions, about going to war, returning from war, and all of those sorts of things. Nonetheless, I'd say over the last 60 years or so, the remembering of our troops, honoring our troops has been pretty Loctite between our political parties and the case for the vast majority of our citizens. It's important to remember those who take up arms in defense of democracy, freedom, and justice for all. But is that in any way different than thinking about Armistice Day? When we do things to remember the troops, support the troops, is that different than supporting those troops who, in the best of senses, would have a reason to lay down their arms and return to their families? At the end of World War I, after great atrocities and war was taking a new mechanized shape with the first tanks and chemical warfare being at a degree that it had not been in the past, what was celebrated was not so much the troops, but the fact that the war was over. That was the first reason for celebrating the armistice. And so the larger question for me, after we remember Veterans Day, is what it means to support those who go to war and supporting a reason for them to return home. Where I was before coming to Maryland, I lived in Abilene, Texas, the home of Dyess Air Force Base. And there were a number of airmen who served there, and I knew quite a few of them. It's kind of easy to find airmen whenever you like to go to bar trivia or out on the town. And so we knew families, we knew couples who valiantly served. Maybe you have served, and I know especially well one couple that I was incredibly close with. We went to gym class together. The wife of the airman served with my wife at Hendrick Hospital, and unfortunately, that airman was deployed during the birth of his child, his first child. What it means to be deployed or to be away for such a momentous life occasion. I mean, what would be more important than the start of the family? Nonetheless, he served his country and had been called away to fight. A sacrifice made over his family for the sake of country, freedom, and democracy around the world. I wonder if by celebrating Veterans Day and specifically his service, we forget that the goal of any armed forces personnel would be to create peace. And how do we celebrate that peace? How do we enjoy that peace? Part of that would be being home to celebrate the birth of a child in peace. I wonder if celebrating Armistice Day doesn't encourage us to clang our sabers, but to say, it's a really terrible thing that people have to be away from home during the birth of their children. It's a really terrible thing to need to fight, and how heavy a task it might be when, after all other diplomatic options have been exhausted, there's a time for us to go to battle. And by us, I mean as a nation, as people who collectively, through our democratic processes, say that these are people who need to be contained by brute force or even by death. Armistice Day, I think and appreciate, is a day to remember that there is hope and that the goal should be the laying down of all of our weapons. And we have biblical reasons to support that. That the ultimate vision of the kingdom of God, Zion, the eschaton, life in the world hereafter, is that life is one where there's no predation. Wolves do not prey on lambs, and people do not prey on people. There is freedom and justice for all, so there's no reason for us to have a standing army or to fight. That day is not here, and there are good reasons for good people who sacrifice themselves to go and serve. But I worry just a little bit that in our nation, when we do so much to support the troops, it seems that we support them going to battle and being soldiers rather than recognizing the sacrifices they make and the hope that we have that one day we don't need to do that anymore. So we have a conflict maybe between our hopes as a Christian, where we'd say the hope, the goal, is that there is an end to violence, and our hopes to support the troops, and we only support the troops while they're troops who need to go to battle on occasion as we deem necessary collectively as a society. I don't think that's an either-or proposition, even though it would be unfortunate if my musing is coming across that way. We are people who support peace. Soldiers are people who, in the best of our understanding and circumstances, also support peace. So, whatever you may have thought this past Thursday, my hope for this Monday and for the days hereafter is, how can you be someone who does the things that support peace? Knowing that as a thoughtful congregation, as people who have served and worked in a lot of different ways, we might have different ways at coming to peace. We might have different ways of discerning when it's important to fight for what we believe in or to lay down what we believe in for the sake of neutrality or not fighting. In either case, I hope that peace is something that you muse about regularly. The Christian tradition is one that is divided between a crusader mentality, where we go and make right and implement right where we need to if things are out of whack, if human rights are not the way that we would understand them. That crusader mentality is thankfully mostly eradicated within Christian theology and hopefully in our politics too. There's the just war tradition that says, as a last resort, there are times that are necessary where we go to fight our battles, even if it means death for other people. Jesus certainly faced violence and died, knowing that bodily sacrifice is sometimes necessary. And then there's the pacifist tradition that says the exact same thing, except it's not willing to pick up arms over and against an enemy, or, we might add, on behalf of the neighbor. So how we understand these three traditions that have existed within the Christian tradition, all of which seek to hold a peace that is not as strong or as vigorous as any one of us would want, that's what I've been musing about after this Veterans Day. We are to remember the good and the bad, those who fight for us and those who have been harmed on our behalf. We are called to celebrate the times when we get to lay down our weapons. And we're called to give special thanks for those who have taken up a special call to go and fight, who have heard the sense of that duty that is not open to everyone, I don't think, but to those who hear it and answer it faithfully. November 11th is a good day to remember them. It's difficult to talk about the violence that the United States has done, that it's needed to do in some circumstances on behalf of our neighbors, whoever we might understand our neighbors to be. But it would be entirely irresponsible for a religion that focuses on the cross, a place of suffering and violence and blood every single Sunday, to go around thinking that that's an ancient practice that doesn't exist anymore. Blood sacrifice, it still exists. And so for those who call for it under democratic processes and for those who suffer under it, those who do that work, November 11th is a good time to muse about our way of creating peace. So I hope you will think about that this week too. Thanks for listening to my musing today. I'll see you next Monday.